let me introduce today's guest. So, Dr. Kenneth Valpey, also known as Krishna Kshetra Swami, is a teacher, writer, and a traveler. He is a research fellow at OCHS, Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, where he is the co-director of the project on Bhāgavata Purāṇa, the research project on that. Together with Professor Ravi Gupta, he has edited a volume of articles and translated a volume of selection from Bhāgavata Purāṇa. Both volumes are actually published by Columbia University. And myself have gone through many of the chapters and I found them really fascinating and very enlightening. And Dr. Valpey, I'm sorry if I pronounce your name properly.
Yes, that's quite right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Dr. Valpey is also a research fellow at the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. Recently, he published a book on animal ethics, which is also one of the topic of discussion in this series. And he's an associate at Oxford Center for Animal Ethics, OCAE, where he has written and lectured on nonviolence, environmentalism, as well as on the application of yoga principles and practices for animal-human relationships and animal protections. And most notably for me, Krishna Kshetra articles, his lectures particularly, and of course books, it's really enlightening. I find, after reading them, after hearing his lectures, I find quite nourished. So I felt all our audience also would benefit from his association. So today's topic that I plan is discussion on God, the absolute nature of God, and Maya, or the evil in a moral, ethical sense. So we want to discuss that. And we want to hear from Krishna Kshetra Swami, from his different aspects of nature of God, as it is described in Gaudiya Vaishnava understanding, or particularly from the Bhagavatam point of view, and also in a generic academia sense, we want to learn from him. So before we begin, I plan, Maharaj, maybe usually what we do, we ask questions to our guest in response. That is the pattern we follow. So maybe if you have anything, any particular way to guide us, that's also acceptable for us. Otherwise, you can continue like that.
Let's play it by ear, as we say in America. We'll see what comes up.
Okay. So before we start, could you please tell us the nature of God? I mean, how do you really, like every religion, the ultimate objective is God. So how do Eastern religions, particularly Hinduism, or particularly the Gaudiya Vaishnava understanding, how it differentiates the understanding of God from, other religions? I mean, do you have any particular way to say so?
These are big questions. Well, you're asking about differentiation, and that's all right, but we might also want to explore similarity.
Yeah, sure, of course, it included in that.
If we're only looking for difference, then I don't know, that may lead us in a certain direction that may or may not be so desirable.
Yeah, right.
I personally am more inclined to see similarities, but if one is only looking for similarity, one also runs the danger of overlooking difference.
Oh, sorry, somebody dropped something.
And so it's a challenge to find the middle way, so to say. And you also said all religions have this characteristic, namely seeking God, but it raises the question of what constitutes a religion. And the common the common case that's discussed, whether or not it's a religion, is Buddhism, in which it can be argued that the aim is not to seek God, depending on which sort of Buddhism you want to consider, because there are many different sorts of Buddhism, including what's called Pure Land Buddhism, which seems to have a lot of, let's say, family resemblance to our personalist understanding of God. But in general, we can say that Buddhist traditions are having a different approach to the problems of life, in which they don't consider it necessary to bring in the notion of God. Whether they are atheist or simply non-atheist, atheist or non-theist is another question. An atheist would be one who kind of actively declares there is no God, which is a kind of funny thing to say, because if there is no God, why is there even need to make that expression? Why deny what doesn't exist? Why are you even thinking about God if you have to say God does not exist? But then there's non-theism, which we also find in some streams of Vedic or post-Vedic thought, where the concern is God may or may not exist, but it's not our concern. Or we may or may not be able to know if God exists, or if he exists, who that person. What can we know about God? We cannot know. Therefore, we won't concern ourselves. That's another possibility. To make generalizations is also fraught with difficulties. If we look at any given religious tradition of the world, there are traditions and there are sub-traditions, and these are changing over time as well. So if we look at Western thought about the nature of God, very broadly speaking, meaning from within the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, and the Islamic tradition, the so-called Semitic religions, or Abrahamic sometimes they're called. There are centuries of discussion about the nature of God, centuries of writings and reflections by so many of their sages. And so you'll find many of them may have wonderful insights about the nature of God. So it's a challenge. You don't want to say something that's oversimplifying. I just came across, let's see if I can find this. I came across an interesting statement by one Islamic theologian from the Middle Ages, which surprised me. He said, here it is. This is from Al-Kindi, or Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, from the 9th century. So he said, we should not be ashamed to acknowledge truth and to assimilate it from whatever source it comes to us, even if it is brought to us by former generations and foreign peoples. For him who seeks the truth, there is nothing of higher value than truth itself.
Quite broad-minded.
It never cheapens or debases him who reaches for it, but ennobles and honors him.
Yeah, very
So
nice.
that was they're called the Falasuf, the philosopher theologians of the Islamic medieval Islamic tradition. They were trying to understand God in rational terms, in philosophical terms. Anyway, that's just one example, I think, of an openness. I mention that because nowadays, unfortunately, our world situation is such that we tend to see everything in oversimplified ways, and we label persons in stereotyping ways. You know, there's the Hindus and there's the Muslims and the Christians and so on.
Yeah.
And the effect is that it really depersonalizes all of us. And just back to Al-Kindi, this quote from him, this reminded me of what we find in second canto Bhagavatam, in the Chatushloki Bhagavatam in chapter 9, spoken by Lord Narayan. What is it? Etav adeva Krishna. Etav adeva. I never remember when I have to. That one should seek the truth in all circumstances and at all times. This is the last of the 4 verses of the Chatushloki. One should seek in all circumstances, in all times, in all places, the truth. So I think that spirit of seeking is what we're looking for, not so much the claiming that we have it all. We've got the whole thing, and therefore there's no more seeking necessary.
Yes, right.
So let's see. You were asking for differences.
Maybe we can sketch in a very, maybe little philosophical way. So as I was reflecting through whatever reading that I have in this context, there seems to be 2 ways of problem before each of the, not only different religions, even within religion, say Hinduism, different groups also. 2 fundamental questions like, say God is a person or is not a person. And second is probably how does he really relate to its creation. So probably all of the philosophies that I surveyed, not necessarily religion, say any other philosophy, say pantheism, panentheism, deism, whatever you name. So everywhere these 2 fundamental problems seems to be the core ideas. So maybe if you can guide us in that direction, if you wish.
Well, you've already said it. It's a problem. Philosophically, it's a problem. In some ways, it's something like the mind-body problem.
Dualism.
That what is the relation? How is mind or spirit connected to the body? How is it that when I think I want to raise my hand, then I can just raise it without, it's not a problem. I can do it.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Mm.
Uh, if in fact they are two completely different principles or substances, how do they connect?
Right.
So in a way, it's a similar problem. What is the connection between God and the world?
Right.
I think we invariably reach toward analogies in order to get some idea of how the relation works. And speaking of the example I gave, how do we connect mind and body? Of course, the Sri Vaishnavas, Ramanujacharya, gave exactly this analogy for the relation of God to the world. He said that the world is the body of God. The relationship is one of body and soul, just as we understand for individual persons, so it is for God and the world. And you could then say, well, that doesn't really solve the problem,
Mm.
since we have the problem of what's the relation of this.
Otherwise, we're just sticking to pantheism kind of understanding that every creation is the God only, nothing else left.
Well, that's another kind of solution, but it's been argued that Vaishnavas are panentheists. If we're going to speak
Yeah.
of pantheism and theism, how are they related? It's often said one would identify as a kind of panentheism, which is that God pervades everything, as he explains in so many ways in Bhagavad Gita, and simultaneously, as he says in the Gita, I am aloof from everything. So that would be the N part of panentheism, that God is aloof. So all the different traditions have wrestled with this in different ways, how to close the gap, so to say. And I think we can generally say of the Abrahamic traditions,
Mm.
there's a very strong emphasis on the otherness of God. God is utterly other than the world. He is utterly other than us. And when we speak of God as having certain attributes, we are only speaking analogically. We're only speaking as an analogy. So when we say God is good, what do we mean? Well, we have, from our experience, some ideas of goodness,
Right.
and then we extrapolate from that. So therefore, God must be perfectly good. We
Mm.
kind of make that analogical leap.
Something like analogical regression, if you like.
Yeah. So the three sort of main Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam have each dealt with this in different ways. And each of them, I would say, each of them find, despite the intellectual efforts or other types of efforts to sort of bridge the gap, they all have their mystical traditions,
Yes.
whereby they understand, if you want to really understand God, you need to experience God. And how do you experience God? You do it through some sort of mystical pursuit. I was just reading again in this same book later, about maybe 2 centuries later, another Muslim scholar, Al-Ghazali, became extremely influential, and he started out as one of these falasuf, as they're called, but he was completely frustrated with it. He had practically a mental breakdown. He was teaching, and then suddenly he was like he couldn't even speak anymore because he was in such anxiety over the subject of how do we understand really who is God? How can we know for sure what we have our theories about God, but is he really like that? How do we know? And so then, in this kind of state of desperation, he joined the Sufis. And the Sufis are the mystics of the Islamic tradition. And he stayed with this group of Sufis for 10 years. And during that time, everything became clear to him that yes, it's about experience, it's about realization, and whatever practices they have. I think they also do some chanting of names of God and so on. But he came out of this very powerfully, speaking about this necessity to realize God, not just to talk about and think about, but to realize by practice. And I think that is, we can say, also distinctive about our Vaishnava tradition, not uniquely the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, and not even uniquely Vaishnavas, but other theistic traditions in India, that there has to be some practice by which God is realized. And that's where our Srila Prabhupada insisted repeatedly. For the word bhakti, he would translate it not as devotion, which is typical, but as devotional service.
Right.
That you want to realize God, then you have to engage in his service, and that is bhakti yoga, of course.
Right.
So anyway, but bridging the gap theologically, coming back now to the Vaishnava tradition, we can also, and tying into this idea of service, is the whole notion of the Pancharatra system. That there is, the Supreme Being is Para, and then he expands as Vyuha, and then he expands as Vibhava. Not terms we use so much in the Gaudiya tradition, but these are standard Pancharatrika terms. And then he expands again as Antaryami, we would say Paramatma, the Lord in the heart. And finally, he expands as Archa Murti, as the Lord in the temple. And according to a prominent Sri Vaishnava, Pillai Lokacharya, I think it was, he said that all of the forms, it's like Russian dolls, one within the other. So within the Archamurti, all the other forms are present, which means the Archamurti is the most powerful. Anyway, so this is the Pancharatrika way of closing the gap. The whole notion of avatara. In the Christian tradition, they speak of incarnation, and they don't like it when we use the word incarnation, because we use it in relation to avatar. Christians generally don't like that because their understanding is there is one and one only incarnation. So their idea is that Jesus the Son of the Father God has descended, has been sent as the Christ, and he is the one unique link between humanity and God. Yeah, that's of course a departure, certainly a radical departure, but it goes with their theology of the Trinity. There is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We might want to translate Holy Spirit as Paramatma.
Right.
But I don't know if they would like that.
They won't like. Our Paramatma is everywhere in everybody's heart. I don't think they would think that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some. I think there's some parallel there still. I think there's some space for discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, as from your words, I gather. So, two things we're discussing, two approaches to decipher this mystery, whether God is a person or not, or the relation, and the second is the connection with His creation. And I mean, the first thing that we define perhaps God, as far I know from our tradition, Vaishnava tradition. So there we talk about God as the source of all possibilities, right from the Vedanta Sutra, the second verse, second aphorism. So in that sense, it becomes inevitable for us to include even the matter, although apparently we make a distinction, we make a divide between God and His creation, say this universe. But at the same time, we want to embrace also matter within the realm of God, because we want God to be the source of all things. So that way, it kind of posits a big intellectual crisis, I would say, to reconcile two different opposites. I mean, how do you see these aspects in other traditions and other religions?
Well, I'm not quite sure I grasp what you're saying, but I wanted to look at this idea of personhood.
Okay.
And maybe that will help us get to what you want to say, because I have some notes here from one, again, Christian theologian, a modern, present-day theologian, has written on something on the idea of divine personhood. And she gives 5 characteristics of personhood, which should be present. Okay. So the first is a person has a rational nature, which means has a capacity for reason and for choice. And this makes of God, she points out, something more than Aristotle's unmoved mover. The early Greek philosopher Aristotle had this idea. He kind of reasoned his way to an unmoved mover. Everything has a cause, and so there must be some cause to all causes. Yeah. And so, but his cause of all causes is an unmoved mover, and that's all. There's no reasoning capacity and no choice. He's just kind of, not a very full sense of personhood. So this is the first. A person has a rational nature, which enables the person to make choices, and to reason. A second attribute of person, a person possesses what is called subjectivity. And one way to understand subjectivity is its self-awareness. It's a sense of I am aware that I am speaking right now. I am aware that I am being seen by others, and I'm aware of myself thinking. And it's also, subjectivity is also, more broadly, it's just sentience. Srila Prabhupada many times emphasized this point, that God is the supreme being, and he's the supreme sentient being, possessing senses. And so God is, from this perspective, the one who is fully conscious of himself.
Yes.
And we can't really say that about ourselves. We can't really say much about how our bodies work, for example.
Right.
I'm always amazed by the function of digestion. We just put something in the mouth, we swallow, and that's it. And everything else is done for us, you know. Vaisvanara Agni.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the second quality of persons. A third one is that a person has relationships with other persons. And here, I think, is where the Vaishnava tradition, and most especially the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, really shines.
Right.
Specifically with the notion of rasa and how God relates to his, to all beings, but especially to his eternal associates, in so many wonderful ways.
Right.
The verse finally came to my mind, etavade eva jigyasa, tattva jigyasanatmana, anvaya vyatarekad yam, yat sarvatra sarvada. That was the point,
Right.
jumping back. Yat sarvatra sarvada, everywhere and at all times. Anvaya vyatarekam yam, both directly and indirectly. Etavadeva jigyasa, one should have this desire for jnana. To that extent, etavan, referring to the previous verses. Anyway,
Thank you.
I'm getting incoherent. So relationships, we might say this is central. We understand what is a person. A person is one who has relations with other persons. Now, at this point, one could say, well, that sounds somewhat circular.
Yeah, right.
What is that? What is that other person that you're having a relationship? And what does it mean to have a relationship? What is that? Well, I think that's what is filled out by our by the Gaudiya tradition, especially as it's been elaborated by our Goswamis, in particular with respect to rasa theory, but also the whole process of bhakti as seva. And so we understand in the most basic sense what is our relation to God. It's one of service. God is the supreme master, and we are his servants. So that's a relationship which is defined in terms of, you can say also it's an analogy. Our experience of servants and masters in this world gives us some idea of what it would be to be God's servant, but only a slight. But the process that's given, the details of the practice, fill out what that would mean in practice.
This also necessarily requires multiplicity of entities, fundamental entities.
Yes,
God
Yeah.
and others. So
Yes. Yeah, which puts us at loggerheads with the Advaitavadins.
right.
But again, to see similarities and parallels in the Abrahamic traditions, they, to my knowledge, for the most part, also insist on individuality. And again, I was just reading in the Islamic theological tradition, they're very strong on this point, although they have this notion that living beings are created at some moment in time. All the Abrahamic religions have that idea. But then, from then on, existing eternally and individually.
Right.
And they put a lot of emphasis on the idea of our responsibility for right action and, yes, right behavior in our relation with God. A fourth...
Sorry to... maybe I can ask one question after you enumerate this 5. That would be better.
Yeah, just the 2. There's 2 more. One is a person is free. Now, how you want to take freedom? Well, that is understood in different ways, and it's another debate. Is free will versus destiny,
Right.
and if God's control is absolute, then where is our freedom? The Bhagavad Gita is based on this understanding that we are free, because Krishna is giving Arjuna a choice. He's urging him to fight, and he's kind of saying, even if you don't fight, you'll end up fighting.
Right.
Because it's your nature. But still, he's giving him a choice, implying that we all have a choice. In a sense, we understand our choice is rather narrow. It's kind of digital. It's 1 or 0. It's yes or no. It's yes to Krishna or no to Krishna, yes to Maya. But then again, it's also something more than that, because we say yes to Krishna, and then how are we saying yes to Krishna? How are we serving Krishna? In infinite variety of ways. Okay, freedom. And the final one, this is a kind of technical term. A person is incommunicable. Now, that doesn't mean that a person cannot communicate. That's not what it means. What it means is you can't replace one person with another person and say, well, they're both persons, so what's the difference? It means that each one really is unique. Right. And you could say irreplaceable, in a sense.
Yes.
Technically, it's explained, this is the characteristic which distinguishes a person from being an instance of a nature, just being a sample of, some particular nature. No, a person is more than that, is irreplaceable. And I would say also there's maybe, I don't know if this could be a 6th attribute, but irreducible. Persons are irreducible to something less than being person.
Yeah, right. So this all kind of parallels with even the very first verse of Bhagavatam, Janmadiyasya yataha annayaditaratascha avijñā swarat. So I see the 3 probably is resonating with Swarat. God is somebody who has infinite amount of freedom. And then Avijñā Swarat is Avijñā, is aware of everything. Kind of.
Yes, yes, that is the idea of omniscience, which is attributed typically to God. There is, in the philosophy of religion in the West, there's a lot of talk about what's called perfect person theology, or perfect being theology, that there will be certain characteristics, for example, omniscience, omnipotence, all goodness, being eternal, being... They also use the term simplicity.
Divine simplicity, something like that.
Well, it's the idea that God is not composed of parts,
Right.
which could then be separated. God is transcendent, God is also immanent. All these are part of perfect being theology.
Right. So, so that conception is something like God is certainly not a monolithic substance, certainly not. But still, how, if God is that kind of stuff, then how does personhood really manifest? Do you see a contradiction over there? Or?
Well, I think that's the ongoing discussion. You know, how do you then relate all of this to understand or realize God? In the philosophy of religion, there's a lot of, sort of on a level of rational, propositional discourse, which arguably has its limits. It's interesting. It's kind of brought out in the Bhagavatam. The question is raised in the beginning of Canto 10, Chapter 87, Prayers of the Personified Vedas, that how is it possible to, with human language, to describe the absolute truth?
Right.
And the answer that comes after many, or in the course of many, many prayers, very rich prayers of Veda Stuti, is there's no problem. There's no problem for two reasons. One, because God is all-powerful, and therefore He can give language by which we can communicate the nature of God. And furthermore, it's no problem because ultimately every word or all of language is just for that purpose. It's just for glorifying God. And so that's what the personified Vedas are doing in those verses. They're answering the question by giving by modeling how to do it. They're modeling how to speak about God. They just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And then as we read, as we hear those verses, we come to appreciate, oh, well, this is understandable. This is, it can be comprehended. It's comprehensible. But always there's a sense of a remainder. And remainder, in Sanskrit, the word remainder is shesha.
Shesha.
And so that's taken up in our, and this is part of Pancharatra really, the idea that the Lord expands to become Balaram. And Balaram does many different services for the Lord, all kinds of services.
Yeah.
In fact, that's his whole raison d'être. He simply wants to serve the Lord. And when all the services are done, are taken care of. In case anything is left over, Shesha,
Yes, sir.
that is taken by Balaram as well.
Right.
So we can also kind of derive from that that it's in taking shelter of Balaram, we understand how to fully comprehend Krishna, because it's Balaram who is the Adi Guru.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sort of rambling. I'm not sure where I'm going with this,
Yeah, maybe.
but
Yeah, yeah. Just I have a couple of questions, if you permit. Can I ask?
Sure.
So in the beginning, we were talking about analogical approaches to decipher this mystery, and then the other one is the basically mystical traditions, where people emphasize on experiences of the personhood.
Mm-hmm.
Like you cited the example of Al Ghazali, if I remember correctly. So,
Yes.
so, in the example just now you quoted the Vedas Stuti in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is 10th canto, 87th chapter. So, the same question is perhaps both the approaches perhaps are married together in the sense. Please correct me if I am wrong. So, the words falls out of the analogies falls out of describing the absolute truth, and the other approach is you experience the Lord directly. So,
Mm.
as you just now mentioned, so as you pursue this rational approach, analogical approach, we use words to describe Supreme Lord, and then at one point, the same words reveal their meaning to us. So kind of both direct experience of the Lord. Maybe we can cite the verse from the Atak Sri Krishna Namadi Navavet Grahyam Indriye Sevan Mukhe.
Sevan Mukhe Jivado Svayameva Spuratyada. Yes.
So the both rational approach and then mystical approaches perhaps glued together in this understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, we might say like that, because if we just look at our regular practice, we're doing the Bhagavatam. We understand is our foundation, and the Bhagavatam is very much concerned with rational understanding of God. There's so many passages which are of an analytical sort, we may say. At the same time, the Bhagavatam is narrative. So many, stories, not story in the sense of not true, but story in the sense of a narrative. And narrative is giving insight which simply straight analysis or propositions don't necessarily give us. So the Bhagavatam is both, and they're nicely married to each other, you can say. And then the practice of reading Bhagavatam is just that. It's a practice. And it's a practice which we understand has a result of purification. Nashta prayeshva bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shalke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Bhakti becomes naishtiki, becomes fixed as a result of this hearing and chanting of the Bhagavatam. And so Srila Jiva Goswami put the Bhagavatam front and center of our tradition, such that indeed the more propositional side of understanding, the more rational side, and for lack of a better word, the more mystical side, they really come together, so that the garden of bhakti, is nicely nourished.
Yeah, this is interesting. And then regarding the five, maybe six, the sixth one you added, characteristics of being a person. So probably most of them appear to be circular. Say, for example, subjectivity. Subjectivity. God, being a person, should be aware of his own personhood. I mean, it's kind of we are defining personhood, and it's becoming a circular attribute that I want to. The person wants to experience his personhood. So, I mean, and then, as you said, this the relationship, that is also, that for us, the Vaishnava understanding, we have conceptions of many. Echo, what is that? I'm forgetting the Upanishad verse where we say, out of
Nityanam, Chaitanas Chaitananam, Eko Bahunam Yo Viradati Kaman. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, thank you so much. So there, at least we save ourselves of being circular, that we have two things to have relation. But for monist, I mean, it's a big trouble. It's again becoming circular. They have the one person, but again, in another sense, the God, since it's not a composite thing, he is the same stuff. Then it includes his creation also within him. So, I mean, I really find it very difficult to reconcile all these ideas. How do we really logically establish this? I mean, even in Bhagavatam also, or any other scripture, when somebody wants to establish logically the personality of absolute, is that really possible, or it's just just the play of words? We just somewhere around make some workarounds and try to. So,
well, first of all, there are different ways. When you have a word like person, there are different ways to approach, defining personhood or the person. The ways of defining are various. And one way of defining, it's a technical term, I don't have it in mind, but you just decide, this is what I mean by person. And in one sense, that's what we do with our understanding of Krishna. We are saying, what is a person? Well, let's start with the highest person. And okay, then who is that highest person, or what would that highest person be like? Well, you can't say like, because he's unique.
yeah.
Okay, then what is he, or who is he, or how? So then we get the entire descriptions. And the entire Bhagavatam as a whole, we understand, is also the person Bhagavat.
Right.
Wait, how can a book be a person? Well, let's not make presuppositions about what is a person.
Okay.
And so that opens up to possibility. The word persona, if we take the original, the English, which comes from the Greek, and the Greek persona originally meant mask. It was used in the Greek dramas. It was something which was covering over, and so it was a persona. You took on a certain character. Is that what we mean by person now? Not exactly. Books have been written just to trace the history of the meaning of the word person in Western philosophy. Whole books are written on the subject.
Yeah, this is interesting. So, just to nail down the points, so we talked quite a lot about the personhood of God being a person or not, and Christianity or say Abrahamic religions. So they endorse for a personality. So does Islam also endorse personality, or how do you see that?
Oh yes, very much. Yes, God is definitely a person with relation to all individuals, and they very much emphasize the individuality of all people. I don't think that extends to animals because they philosophically, to my knowledge, they're quite rooted in Aristotle, who had this idea that there are human soul, animal soul,
Yeah, right.
vegetable soul, you know.
Yeah, he made the discussion on form and substance reverse his master's Plato's idea and kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah, that's there also. But no, Islam is very much personalist in that sense. But for them, this person who is God, Allah, is so much other than anything that he doesn't have a form. It's not that he doesn't have a material form, but he doesn't have a form, it seems. And therefore, more than any of the other Abrahamic traditions, they're extremely strong on this point that there should be no representation, no effort to represent God. And that, of course, has been the cause of so much confrontation and conflict, especially in India, where the Vedic and post-Vedic traditions are kind of exactly the opposite. That God is, because he's unlimited, it is no problem for him that he also has form, and any forms we see in this world are but reflections of his original form. And can he be represented? Yes, if God directs us how to represent him, we can do so. And we don't have to be confused thinking that God is only present in this form. And that's the worry of the Abrahamic traditions, that if you represent God, then you will be thinking God is only in this murti and nowhere else. And we don't, the Vaishnavas don't have that problem.
Yeah, for Vaishnavas, for us, the deities are probably, for the devotees, it's 100% Krishna standing, the same transcendental person. So, but for somebody who is not, into this tradition, for him, really doesn't make a distinction between the statue being a stone and really the personality of Godhead. The supreme person with all attributes, all perfection. So this poses a little problem, at least intellectual problem, that how do you really establish it philosophically?
Well, I think that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
Actually, I've written a small book which is going to be coming out soon with the Australian BBT. It's called Krishna's Wonderful Form, A Guide for the Perplexed. It's specifically on this topic. How do we understand the deity in the temple? So, yeah.
So we can briefly, maybe a few minutes, if you could kindly
Well, in the first part of the book, I'm addressing the basic charge of idolatry from the Jewish tradition, and the way I do this is to go to one analysis by Jewish scholars of what is idolatry, and they've identified five different sorts of understanding or types of idolatry. And so I go through each one of these in some detail. One of them is representation, the idea that you can represent God by, some physical form. The claim is that you cannot do that. There's the biblical prohibition against doing that. And so I just say, well, in the Vaishnava tradition, it's quite the opposite. It's that it's very good and healthy and helpful to represent God if one has a proper understanding of God, by which one does not, think that God is only in this form. And then with that proper understanding, one can engage in service, by which sevanmukhe jivado, etc., the senses become rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhaktiruchate, the senses become purified. So I just kind of go one after another through these. The first of the principles of idolatry is actually most people are not familiar with. It's the notion of betrayal. And this goes back to the earliest Jewish idea that Yahweh is the God of Israel, and the Israelis must follow his orders, and if they don't, they're being unfaithful, and their unfaithfulness is compared to prostitution, which is can be punishable by death. And so they took it very seriously. But that applies to Jews in Israel, worshiping their Israeli God, who through history they came to see as the universal God. So that doesn't apply very much, but I show how we understand from some of Krishna's statements in the Bhagavad Gita. He's also, in effect, speaking about loyalty, but at the same time, he's keeping things quite open. He says, if you want to worship the demigods, you can do that. And I will give you even the faith that you do that. And you will get the results. And you will get the results quickly. But you should know that those results are actually coming from me. And you should know that you're actually quite foolish to be worshiping those devatas because everything is coming from me.
Right.
Yeah, so like that. Also, worship as error. One of the forms of idolatry is to do the wrong kind of worship. One of the interesting things that came up in the reading I did was that it seems there was a practice amongst the Jewish people to chant names of God. But then it seems this became neglected. And Maimonides, who wrote this book, A Guide for the Perplexed, the original Guide for the Perplexed, in the 12th century, he was concerned that people are going to get even more distracted now if they have some murti of God. They're just going to get caught up in that worship, and they're going to forget I don't think by that time they were chanting, so I don't know what his worry was. But anyway, there was some kind of practice of chanting names of God. So we would say, well, that's a form of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sound form.
Right.
Many different kinds of ways that God can appear, and one of them is sound. And we might want to even say, well, you don't like to see a visual form, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. Then just chant the names of God. And the idea that one cannot pronounce the name of God, that's also there in Judaism. But that's a later development. It wasn't there originally. And in the Islamic tradition, they have their 99 names of God,
Right.
which are all describing different qualities, attributes. So, and in the Sufi traditions, I think that especially they're chanting names.
So Islam, even though it prohibits portrayal of God in some pictorial way, but still they do chant so many names. I mean, that is itself the form of God. So
yes,
right.
and also the Quran itself as a book, we can say that's a form of God for Islam.
Right.
It's one way it's been explained is that for Islam, the Quran is the equivalent of Jesus in the Christian tradition in terms of mediation between God and humanity.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, we can, the Vaishnava can say, that's fine, you don't want to have a visual form of God. No problem. No worries, as the Australians say. No worries, mate. So you can, chant names of God. You can hear the Quran. That's fine.
So just to sum up, the Bhagavatam conceptions really embraces. I mean, the verse that Vadanti tattva vidas tattvam yad jnana madhyam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti sabjate.
Bhagavaniti sabjate.
So we do have a conception where we accept that God is. If somebody raises the question, is God not a person? We have an answer. Yes, he's not a person, probably. And then we have Bhagavan is person with all attributes. And then we have an intermediate also, Paramatma. So this philosophy is kind of
comprehensive.
Yeah. So
well, that's one way of understanding a religious tradition is always aspiring for comprehensiveness. So this is one way of expressing that comprehensiveness is Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdyate. Yes, all three in one.
Nothing left after that. This is an interesting way to reconcile, really. And then the other part is
nothing left except for the Shunyavadi.
That is.
They will say, actually, there's this shunyata. But that's another subject. But they write volumes and volumes and volumes of books to explain this shunyata.
How does this Bhagavatam theology, can it embrace the Sunyavada also in some way?
I find one very nice way that we embrace it, and that is in the prayer by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yugaitam nimeshena chakshusha pravishaitam shunyaitam jagat sarvam govinda virahena me. That in the absence of Govinda, I experience only emptiness. And it's interesting, that's another thing I was just reading, because there have been long debates within Buddhist traditions, what do we mean by shunyata? There's been a proposal by some scholars that, well, maybe the best way to get at what we're talking about is to focus on the experience. What is our experience of shunyata? And to that, then, I would say, well, we have an experience of shunyata, and this is what it is, and this is how it comes about. It comes about for one who has such intense devotion for Govinda that feeling this absence of Govinda, one sees everything as empty.
Yeah, this is really interesting. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for that. It's already in our time. It's 8:45.
Yes.
Do you have some more time if you are available, or maybe a few more minutes?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. So maybe we can carry forward the discussion next time. But for today's completion, so we discussed a lot about the nature of the personhood of God. So regarding the creation of God, in abstract sense, as we were discussing in the beginning, the divide between God and His creation, or in the similar parlance, maybe mind and body, mind-body dualism. So in that same note, so what is the existence of the other side? We at one instance we are saying that it is part of God being creator of everything. Everything is included within absolute truth. Then how do you really position the creation or the energy of the expansions of that is emanating from God? How do you really position? Advaitans kind of radically differ from the Vaishnava conceptions. I don't know what other religions and other traditions how do they pose?
I'm not so knowledgeable myself. I know that in the Greek Orthodox Christian tradition, they speak about God's energies. But how much we can make parallels with our understanding of energies, I'm not sure, because they're very much rooted in the ancient Greek tradition, again, mainly Aristotle. Well, actually, they may go more to Plato, the Orthodox, than the West. But, of course, in our tradition, this is straight Vaishnava Vedanta, the idea of Shakti Parinamavada, which Srila Jiva Goswami gives us, that there is Shakti and there's Shaktiman, there is Brahman, and there's the energy or energies of Brahman, and they are, that's where the specific idea of simultaneous, inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference comes.
Right.
Inconceivable, but at the same time, kind of not so difficult to understand. In other words, the example, we go to examples. Jiva Goswami says, like the sun and the sunlight. And we look and we see sun and we see the sunlight, and well, that's not very difficult. We have it every day, the sunlight and the sun. So there's an intimate relation between, and a kind of inseparability, we say, between the energetic and the energy.
Probably,
and that enables us to say that there is change, there is transformation, there, so on, because it's kind of against the rules of the game to say that Brahman changes. That's you break the rules when you do
right.
that. So we don't say that. We say that the energies of Brahman are changed.
Right.
Shakti Parinamavada.
So this,
that's my understanding.
So this example of sun sign, I also find it little difficult in the sense, the stress on the word simultaneous is little for me little problematic. I'm not able to follow it properly. So when we cite the word simultaneous, I mean, say the example of sun and sunshine. Sun is right within my room and it's not within my room. So how do I really fit into my simultaneous existence? I mean, I really find it very difficult. Could you kindly elaborate a bit, if possible? I don't know how to.
Well, in that analogy, the sun is in your room, but if you close the curtains to your window, then immediately the sun is kept out. In other words, the source of that light, because it has been cut off by your curtains, prevents the energy, in this case the light, to come through, even though the sun is so far away, it's coming through as long as the window's open. And that is the non-difference. And then we see the dependence of the energy on the energetic as soon as we block the energy. You see what I'm saying? The sun ray that's coming, as they say, 93 million miles, is a constant stream.
Right.
It's not that it's, something that just got sent out and then the sun turns off or something. It's a constant stream. It's ongoing.
Right.
So in the same way, we are ourselves, we are therefore part, Prabhupada used that expression, part and parcel of God. We are connected with God all the time. And therefore we are alive because we have that connection. I see a hand up. There is Dr. Varun Shukla, Vanam Alidas. Should we respond?
Yeah, please. And I also posted in the chat box. If any of the participants, if you have any questions, 1-2 more questions, it's already 8:50, but we can still maybe 1-2 questions you can take. Yeah, Banamali, Das, if you want, you can unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna, Dandat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, there are 4 Vaishnava Sampradaya. So, from which Sampradaya Lord Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, and Moses came?
Yeah, the idea of sampradaya, of course, they don't use the expression sampradaya. That's from the Vedic or post-Vedic tradition, but they do speak very much of a kind of succession, which, yes, as I understand, comes from Abraham and then goes through so many generations. And I believe they speak of Jesus as being a descendant. I don't know if that's, I think so, that's used, a descendant of King David. And these, it's been so long since I've read any of this, but in at least one of the 4 main Gospels, in the very beginning, they list so many names to highlight, to make this point that, there is this succession.
There is one more question from Charuta Kale. So here, I don't know, he or she, Prof. C. So he's saying that how do we explain God's omnipotence and benevolence in the face of sufferings like that is happening in Ukraine currently, and all the suffering that has already existed in this world?
Well, that is the ever perennial question, which is not something I think I can get into this time.
Right.
The discussion on how, I mean, you have worded the question in a certain way, and it's a question which has engaged theologians for centuries, and more than centuries, for millennia.
Right.
And the effort to answer the question is called Theodicy. Theodicy is essentially the effort to explain how a perfect being, God, can be existing, and what we experience as evil in the world, how these can be reconciled. And it's difficult. It's really difficult. We do it, but whether anyone has done it really thoroughly, Srila Prabhupada generally uses the analogy of the prison, that we are being punished, we are in a condition which is one essentially of punishment, and but it's also of reform. And so if we understand that purpose of material world as reform above all, then we can understand how God is allowing so many miseries to take place. Still, it can be difficult, and especially this has been challenging for the Jewish tradition after what is called the Holocaust, essentially the murder of some 6 million Jews, mainly in Germany, also here in Poland. What kind of God would allow this to happen? And they've written volumes and volumes and volumes of books trying to answer this question.
Yeah, this problem of evil is really the foremost argument of even the atheist to say that there is no God. This is really, maybe we can, if you permit, next time we can reflect more on these issues, or maybe subsequent.
Yes. Okay.
There is just one more question. Shankar from Shankar Das. If you like, you can directly unmute yourself, or you can type.
Hello. Yes, I want to ask.
Yep.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I want to ask that after studying so many, after studying so many religious, currently many forms of religions, what is your experience? Like, are we reaching to a stage where we can understand the God, or still we are in the process of understanding it? Because many religions have actually tried to understand it from their perspective. We cannot compare every religions to each other, but yes, they are still figuring out about the God. So what is your remark on this point?
Yeah, I think, thank you. It's an interesting question, which I think one could take as an individual or as in a collective sense. Are we the
Correct.
human
Yes.
race?
Collective.
Yeah. Are we as a
Yes.
human race coming to a better understanding of who is God? One would like to hope so. One would like to hope
Yeah.
so. But
Yes.
one
Yes.
sometimes wonders if we are making any progress. I personally go through different moods. Sometimes I'm feeling more hopeful and sometimes less. But I'm especially hopeful thinking how strongly and clearly our own acharyas have presented the bhakti tradition to identify God as indeed having a name, having a place, having qualities, name, form, qualities, pastimes. For me, this is our hope, that people can really This is you know, so attractive. Krishna is so attractive
Yes,
that
yes, very true. Very true.
it's a Prabhupada had great great faith and hope that the world would take up this idea of God and take it
Correct.
seriously.
Correct.
So
Yeah. Any further questions from the participants, or we can?
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking this nice question. So I don't think we have more questions for today. It's already 9 p.m. in India. It must be some 4:30 at your place.
Yes.
4:30. Okay. So thank you very much, Krishna Maharaj, for kindly
My pleasure.
enlightening us in so many varied aspects from your rich experiences that you carry over the many decades. So we hope to hear from you in subsequent days next week. Of course,
Yes.
next week the discussion will be a bit shorter because he has another engagement right
A
after.
little shorter, yes.
We can wrap it up in 1 hour. So
yes, what is our topic next week? I'm looking hermeneutics of faith and reason across traditions.
Or any other thing, if you like to make as a natural carry forward from this discussion, you can suggest, or maybe problem we can discuss, whatever you feel
Yeah,
appropriate.
Perhaps we can address this also.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much. Today we discussed quite a lot about the personhood of God and how different traditions say different things about personhood. We talked about two approaches, if I'm right, the analytical rational approach, and then this mystical approach, which is there practically every tradition, and our Bhagavatam, which is kind of so wonderful literature that it embraces all kinds of aspects that are explored in different religions. It embraces rational and also mystical Bhakti tradition. So it's such a wonderful text, and Krishna Kshetra Maharaj is, I would say, living Bhagavat, because he's exemplifying through his practices the message that is there in Bhagavatam. So we are so delighted and so honored that he kindly agreed to be with us and enlighten us. So we are so thankful to you, Maharaj. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, and all the best to all of our participants.
Thank you so
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.